All right, here we are. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the Cosmos Society Online Open House Series, which is produced by the Harvard University Center for Hellenic Studies. I am Keith DeStone, an associate at the center, and our guest today, whom we are very honored to have with us, is Professor Vinciane Pirenne of the Collège de France. She'll be speaking with us today on the topic of Themis, thesmos, and nomos. Are there divine laws in ancient Greece? Her fields of research are ancient Greek religion, ancient polytheism, and the historiography of the history of religions. She has a long list of publications and accomplishments, of which I'll mention two that might be of particular interest to our group here. A freely available online database of ancient Greek epigraphical material to do with ancient Greek ritual, the collection of Greek ritual norms, also a book on the goddess Hera, co-authored with Gabriella Peronti, which Cambridge University Press will be bringing out in English very soon. So, Professor Pirenne, Vinciane, if I may, thank you for accepting our invitation. Welcome. And if you don't mind sharing with us a bit about, as you know, how these things go, these open houses, a bit about your first inspiration to study the ancient world. Thank you.
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today. So I discovered the Greco-Roman world in high school when I started to study Latin and Greek. And I had the chance to meet two wonderful teachers, female teachers, passionate about their work and who managed to bring this culture to life for their pupils. So like many teenagers, I was immediately fascinated by the world of the Greek gods and by a religion so different from the Christian environment, the Christian culture around me. So, but contrary to many teenagers, I kept this fascination alive during my studies and even at the university when I studied history with a strong preference for ancient history. In brief, I'm no longer a teenager, but I'm still fascinated by ancient polytheism, which has been at the core of my research for many years now. So very beginning, it was high school and wonderful teachers, because we have to repeat that wonderful teachers are so important for pupils and then for students.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. So the microphone is yours, and feel free to begin sharing the slides whenever it's convenient.
Yes, I hope it will work. So,
I see it coming up there.
So normally you can see the whole screen, okay?
That's perfect.
Okay, so I put all the faces on my screen. It's more sympathetic. So thank you for the share. So when Hélène Mériot invited me to participate in the seminars of the Cosmos Society, she proposed me to present my current research. Accordingly, I will talk about a small part of the topic I addressed this year at the Collège de France in the courses of this year from February to mid-April, so it's just finished. And the topic is religious norm and questions of authority in the ancient Greek world. And as I told you before, if you want to exercise your French, all the courses are available in open access online on the website of the Collège de France. We have a very strong politics of open access. So let me first set the scene by explaining the title chosen for my talk today, as you can see on the screen. The question, are there divine laws in ancient Greece, is rooted in a standard vision of ancient Greece supposed to have developed from the 6th to the 4th century BC, an autonomous intelligence considering humankind and not divinity as the measure of things, of all things even. From the end of the 19th century until recently, the civilization of ancient Greece was held to have known a development from myth to reason. It's the so-called, as you know, perfectly know, mythos to logos process. In a progress supposed to embrace philosophy, historiography, medicine, politics, and as well as law. It's law, of course, that will interest me today. And the place, and I want to focus on this point in this historiographical part of my talk, the place of Greek religion in these discourses, modern discourses, was and remains highly ambiguous. First trend in this discourse, the grand narrative that makes Greece the cradle of modernity obviously does not include religion. Christianity came to occupy this place and to play the religious role of agent forging modernity. Accordingly, if the Greeks are our ancestors in so many fields, they are not labeled in the same way as far as religion is concerned. Greek religion, ancient Greek religion, of course, is considered a rather primitive system, an orthopraxis based on ritual, disconnected from the rest of what is Greece in this grand narrative. Second trend, linked to the first, a civilization as brilliant as that of the Greeks must have developed by breaking away from obscurantist views of religion. Religion was superseded by reason in the process from mythos to logos. Mainly in the French-speaking world of scholarship, Greece is considered as the place of the first laicizations. In English, it becomes secularization, which is presumed to be evidenced in various fields of activity. Of course, today, many Hellenists feel rather uncomfortable with various aspects of this grand narrative, highlighting the exceptionality of the Greeks. The so-called Greek miracle is deeply questioned, and scholars adopt various strategies to address in different ways the undeniable achievement of the Greek world. For my part, I feel uneasy, like many others, with the idea of laicization or a secular conception of the world, which is anachronistic for understanding ancient cultures. I also feel uncomfortable with the disconnection between the so-called achievement of the Greek world and their relationship to the gods, since the gods were in multifarious ways embedded in their life. So if I can summarize this first point, Greek religion has to be taken into account seriously. If we do not, we are unable to understand why so many cities built temples, performed sacrifices, erected divine statues, in brief, spent so much money and energy during centuries for something they would have considered non-rational or unimportant in other words. That's it for the background, but you probably realize that today I will address only a small part of a huge program. Starting from a lexical and semantic analysis, hence the first part of my title that you see on the screen, Themis, thesmos, and nomos, I try to understand how archaic Greece understood what we call law, and if the vocabulary can help us to identify a shift from divine to human law. As I just said, a small part of a huge program. So a few words first about the notion of Themis in archaic poetry, the first of the three words that you can see on the screen. Before addressing thesmos and nomos, the two words used for logos in Greek language. First remark, Themis is etymologically related to the verb thitemi, to set up, to dispose, to order. And in Homer and Hesiod, the expression that you can see on the screen, he Themis esti, can be translated by what the Themis allows or what the Themis recommends. The latitude offered by Themis or the obligation it implies can be found in particular in the register of ritual, first point, ritual, second domain of emotional life, relations between parents and children, between spouses, etc. But also, and it's the third level, in the framework of social life. For example, duties towards guests. The expression hexainon themis that you see on the screen expresses this obligation to welcome guests, to help strangers. So xainon themis with the genitive determining the word. So in these three registers, ritual, emotional life, and social life, we are in the human world, but the divine world is also supposed to be commanded by Themis. Let us take a passage from Hesiod's Theogony. The context is the dawn of the battle between the Olympian and the gods of the previous generation. Zeus promises to the gods who will fight with him that they will keep their existing rights or win new ones if they have been kept without honor by Kronos. So this is for the context. And I read the translation of the text with you. And he, so it's Zeus, he said that whosoever of the gods would fight with him against the Titans, he would not cast him out from his rights, but each should have the honor which he had before amongst the deadless gods. And he declared that he who was without honor or right under Kronos should be raised to both honor and right, as Themis recommends. And you recognize the expression in Greek, he Themis estin, to which I referred previously. As you can see on the screen with the bold letters, the passage is full of references to Time and Geras, words which refer for the first to the honor devoted to a person according to his rank, his stature or value. It's for Time. And Geras is the concrete elements of this due. So we see how important these notions are in Hesiod's Theogony. And not only in Theogony, because these elements are an essential part of ancient Greek society as a whole. The status of an individual, whether divine or human, implies a share of honor that recognizes this status. Let me remind you that the plot of the Iliad is based on the anger of Achilles, who was deprived of his share of the booty. The major poem of Greek culture is infused with issues of Geras and Time. The narrative core of the theogonic process described by Hesiod is also full of this topic, as you can see on the screen. The power of Zeus as king of gods and humans is realized by the war against the previous generation, but also by the recognition of the status of the other gods. And later in the poem, but I don't have time to to go in that direction later in the poem by the attribution of its own condition to humanity. So the passage of the theogony on the screen attests that Themis commands the recognition of status and the devolution of the share to everyone. But in Hesiod, as well as in later cities, and so in the concrete part of the religious life of the Greeks, so in Hesiod and in cities, Themis is also a goddess. She becomes the second wife of Zeus and begets children to the divine king. And this is, wait a minute. So let's read the passage of the theogony that you have on the screen, the translation. So next it's still Zeus, married bright Themis, who bore the Horai, the Nomia, Dike, and blooming Eirene, who mind the works of mortal man, and the Moirai, to whom white Zeus gave the greatest honor. And you see that we still have Time. Oh, sorry. So the greatest honor, Cloto and Lachesis and Atropos, who give mortal man evil and good to have. So it's the passage with Themis as a goddess. So Themis is a goddess, a divine power acting in the world. Defining her with or without capital letter, because of course in our translation we have to choose if we put the capital letter or not. But for a Greek ear, it doesn't have any meaning. So define her, Themis, so it's a difficult task indeed, but the identity of her children in Hesiod that you have on the screen is illuminating according to the rule. I don't know if you know this rule in the genealogical process of the theogony and in Greek narratives about divine genealogy in general. The divine children make the qualities of their divine parents more specific. So you still have this relationship between divine parents and divine children in divine genealogy. Accordingly, according this rule, Themis encompasses as mother of the Moirai, so the parts, if I can translate the name in the Greek name, the parts. So Themis encompasses the necessity of limit and the balance of good and evil that her daughters impose to human beings. First quality of Themis. As mother of the group of the Horai, Themis is related to the regulation of time, of natural and socio-biological rhythms, since the Horai make what is appropriate happen at the right time. The Horai, so it's the group. As a group, they are connected, related to the regulation of time. As individual figures, they illustrate even more precisely the capacities of their mother. You can see on the screen, we have eunomia. Eunomia, if I translate the Greek word, is the right or the fair distribution, which implies good order and organization. And I shall return to this figure. Decay is justice in the sense of the right application of the imperatives of Themis. And Eirene, it's quite clear, is peace. And it's the result of the action of her two sisters. So you can see how the rule is applied to this genealogy. So again, this background, one can see Themis. I still try to define the name. one can see Themis as a global requirement of balance, which comes to mind in difficult contexts where an individual or a group must act. So it's the definition that I can propose you for Themis, a requirement of balance. And with this formula, I quote the attempt at a definition made by Jean Rudart. I don't know if you know this wonderful scholar, Swiss from Switzerland. So Jean Rudart wrote in 1999 a very beautiful book about Thémis et les Horai, donc recherche sur les divinités grecques de la justice et de la paix. And it's his proposal to define Themis, and I try to translate in English his beautiful but complicated French. So requirement of balance. And for Hélène, in French, it's in exigence d'équilibre. That's what I try to translate by requirement of balance. And so the definition comes from this book. And Themis' daughter contribute in their own specific way to the need for balance and regulation that their mother carries in a global manner. And then, according to the rule I mentioned, you have a specification of this globality by the daughters. By taking Themis as a second wife, Zeus as king, because that's the point in the text that you have on the screen. By taking Themis as a second wife, Zeus as king takes charge of the regulating potential of Themis in the cosmos. And this is also expressed by the use of the word without a capital letter in the distribution of Themi seen before. So we see the power of Themis with or without capital letter in the first passage that we read, and in this passage where genealogy is presented by the poet. The couple's union, so Themis and Zeus, expresses the impact of Themis in the world, stabilized under the authority of Zeus. So the marriage is also a way to integrate the idea of stabilization by Zeus. The world depicted in the verses of Hesiod, as well as of Homer, even if the material is not the same, is regulated by Themis and her requirements. This is a first step in the identification of what I call a norm, religious norm and question of authority. So when we try to identify in the Greek vocabulary the question of norm, Themis is quite a good example. So the norm encompassing all reality, the cosmos as a whole, as we saw in the Theogony, commanding man as well as gods. In Homer, just a few words about Themis in Homer. So we have two, exactly like in Hesiod, the expression het Themis esti for many things. But when we are looking at conflicts in a group in the Homeric poetry, we see that these conflicts are arbitrated by the elders or the kings of the group, who tell Themistes, which is, I don't have text to show, but it will be quite brief, which is Themis in the plural. So closely linked to Zeus, the Themistes, told by the elders of a group to resolve conflict, for example, are rooted in the global Themis and help a group to manage the conflicts, to restore the balance between its members. So it's still the same process. You have this requirement of balance when Themis is involved. So this was for the first word of my title, Themis, and my first point. For addressing the two other words, I will start with a passage quoted from the Cyropedia of Xenophon. And sorry, I did not transmit this precise reference to Hélène with the others. It was a decision, I took the decision to show you this text after having sent the reference to Hélène. So I read the translation with you. Yes, by Zeus, said Cyrus, I don't know, Kyros in Greek.
Sorry, Cyrus, as we
Cyrus,
say. Yes,
thank you.
of course.
For I know that you, and Cyrus is talking to his father. I know that you always used to say that those who had not learned to ride had no right to ask the gods to give them victory in a cavalry battle. And those who did not know how to shoot had no right to ask to excel in marksmanship. Those who did not know how, and those who did not know how to steer had no right to pray that they might have saved ships by taking the helm. Neither had those who did not sow at all any right to pray for a fine crop, nor those who were not watchful in war to ask for preservation, for all that is contrary to the thesmos of the gods. And I keep the word untranslated for the moment. So it's contrary to the thesmos of the gods. You said, moreover, that it was quite as likely that those who prayed for what was atemitos, and you have here a word, of course, closely linked to Themis too, was atemitos, so without Themis, should fail of success with the god, as those who asked for what was contrary to human law, and the word is paranomos, and in the plural, paranoma, should be disappointed at hands of man. So end of quotation. So what are the thesmoi of the gods in this passage? So it's just my second word. And if I show you this text, even if it's not, of course, as you know, archaic poetry, it's because we have the two words that I referred to in my title, thesmos and paranomos, and so nomos behind the adjective. So what are the thesmoi of the gods in this passage? Comments inspired by Themis, seen, I repeat, as a requirement of balance. So what does it mean in this text precisely? Greek gods are not expected to perform miracles for humans who are completely inept or inexperienced. Both gods and men must remain within the bounds of what is fitting and proper. So you don't have to ask miracle. It's not the work of the god. They have to keep in the limit of the Themis, and men have to keep within the limits too. So within what I like to call, I hope that it's a good expression in English, a regulatory net. In French, I would say a filet régulateur, a regulatory net, something that encompasses, but without being too hard, too strict. A net is more fluid. So within the regulatory net of the Themis, men also lay down rules of their own. And since their transgression is a paranomon, Xenophon implicitly calls these rules nomoi. So with Xenophon, and that's why I took this text, even it's the early 4th century BC, with Xenophon come the next two words of my title, thesmoi and nomoi. So I propose you to do the same exercise as with Themis, namely searching for their meaning in archaic poetry. So first remark about nomos, it's evident, but I prefer to repeat evidence. First remark about nomos, it comes from the verb nemo, to distribute, to apportion, or if I want to give the complete meaning of the verb, to allocate according to use and convenience. It's not just distribute. We have other verbs in Greek to tell exactly this, distribute in general. Here you have the notion of allocate according to use and convenience. So you have a nuance in the meaning of the verb. We have just met the notion, if you remember what I told some minutes ago, we have just met the notion with the name Eunomia, belonging to Themis' daughter. She is precisely right or fair distribution, but not a simple distribution, something more elaborated. In Hesiod, the theogony, as we saw, the genealogical priority of Themis over Eunomia, since she is her mother, implies in the language of myth that she incorporates what is meant by nemo, the verb of distribution. The right distribution commanded by Eunomia takes place within the encompassing framework of Themis. They are closely related. That's what genealogy is telling us. So, but what about nomos? It was the name that I study now. So nomos as such is also attested in the Theogony, and I choose two passages which concern the Muses at the opening of the poem, verses 66, 67. So you see the Greek on the screen and the translation, and I read the translation with you. They, so it's the Muses, sing the nomoi, so I keep the Greek, the nomoi and the goodly ways, happy akedna, of all the immortals. So it's the core of the song of the muse, the nomoi and the goodly ways of all the immortals. Second passage, verses 71, 74. I read the translation. They, it's still the Muses, they went to their father, and he was reigning in heaven, himself holding the lightning and glowing thunderbolts, when he had overcome by might his father Kronos, and he distributed fairly to the immortals their portions and declared their privileges. This passage announces at the very beginning of the poem what would happen in the poem itself: the conquest of power by Zeus over Kronos, and the ordering of the privileges that belongs to the gods. And you see the connection with the other passage that we saw before. Regarding the latter, this is exactly what is said to be Themis in the passage, so about the distribution of the Themi. In the society of the gods, Zeus accomplishes a right distribution based on a fair repartition of honors and privileges respecting the rights of each god. And you see that nomos is involved in this process. The nomoi of the gods are the rules of behavior. This is the case in the first passage that you have on the screen. The rules of behavior which they adopt according to the structure of the divine society established by Zeus according to Themis. So once again, Themis is first, and then you have all what is within her in some way. They express the result of the distribution operated by the king of the gods. So, but in this poem, what about the man? So until now, about nomos, I saw you passages where the gods are concerned. What about man? In the theogony, still in the theogony, we see them, so the man, performing, for example, the sacrifice here in the verse that you have on the screen, a sacrifice katanomon. So anyone of man on earth offers beautiful sacrifices according to custom. I translate here the nomos as custom. But of course, theogony is mainly a story of gods. In the other poem of Hesiod, the works in days, men are more concerned by the work. And the expression is even clearer, the expression of nomos. And I read the translation of the passage with you. For the son of Kronos, so still Zeus, he is omnipresent in all these passages. For the son of Kronos has ordained this nomos, that for man, that fishes and beasts and winged fowl should devour one another for right. And you see on the screen it's decay. For right is not in them, but to mankind he gave right, which proves far the best. For whoever knows the right and is ready to speak it, far-seeing Zeus gives him prosperity. As you can remark, the verb that governs nomos in this passage is diatasso, the same as in the verse of the prologue of the Theogony, where Zeus distributes portions and privilege among the gods. So we still have the same kind of expression in all these passages. And so Themis, I come back to Themis and her connection with nomos. Themis concerns the whole cosmos. It's a regulatory net encompassing life in all its manifestations. And nomoi are ways of being, ways of doing that respect an order demanded and sanctioned by the gods themselves. So you see that with nomos, we are not in all the passages that I showed you until now, we are not in a completely different context than with Themis, except the fact that nomos is not a divinity, what Themis and Dike are. So the third word, and I will come back to nomos, of course, at the end. The third word to examine is thesmos. Thesmos. It doesn't appear in Hesiodic poetry and is used only once in the Homeric epic. And this unique occurrence deserves attention. And I show you the text, which is so interesting. The third word, we are at the end of the Odyssey, as you see. The book 23. At this stage of the plot, Penelope has finally accepted to recognize her husband. They are going to their bedroom, preceded by the maid Eurycleia, who lights their way. And then comes the text that you have on the screen. And I read the translation. When she had led them to the bridal chamber, she went back. So it's Eurycleia who is going away. And they then gladly came to the place of the coach, the bed, that was theirs of old. As you see on the screen, Murray, and I took the translation to Murray, translates thesmos by place, while other translators, and not only in English, in many different languages, refer only to the bed, and they are completely skipping thesmos in this passage. The word thesmos, etymologically related to titemi like Themis, globally means what is placed. If we must translate thesmos. It's what is placed, what is instituted. How can we understand this usage in the Odyssey? It's quite strange to see this word at this place. The context of the passage is important because the bridal room and the bed are essential elements in the recognition seen in the book 23. And I try to deepen this aspect. To be convinced of the identity of the man supposed to be her husband, Penelope sets a trap for him before the scene that you have on the screen. A trap for him by making him believe that their bed has been moved. You certainly remember this beautiful passage. By doing so, Penelope provokes a reaction that only Odysseus is likely to show because he built the work himself, and the structure of the piece of furniture is a sign. And you have in the passage before, the one you have on the screen, you have the recurrence of the word sema, semata, and the bed is something very special. And the bed is built around an olive tree trunk rooted in the palace floor, which makes it immovable unless the olive tree itself is cut. That's why it's a sema. The passage where the thesmos is inscribed implies that it refers to something very concrete that is placed, established, if I take the meaning of thesmos. This is also the case in some other poems, for example, of fragments of Anacreon, who designated Thesauros in this way with the word thesmos. In some verses of Pindar also we find thesmos with a concrete sense of what is elaborated, established. Thereafter, the meaning of law will take precedence. But of course, here, if we translate by law, it doesn't make sense. So we have to understand the richness of the word in this passage. And a gloss by the lexicographer Hesychius in the imperial period, of course, we are very far away from archaic times, propose an interesting interpretation in this respect. So you see the Greek and the translation on the screen. Thesmos, nomos taios, the divine law that we are looking for. Divine laws or the arrangement of the pieces of wood. And you see in Greek, tas synthesis ton xylon, with the word synthesis, where we also have the same kind of root. This perfectly encapsulates what the bed of the royal pair is. Just if I translate otherwise what you have on the screen, Lectroio Palaio Tesmon, it's the stable arrangement of the coach that was theirs of old. However, materiality is not enough, since the implication of any poetic mention of a nuptial bed go far beyond the object itself, and we meet nuptial beds in poetry quite often. For example, when the goddess Hera wants to swear an oath to justify herself in front of Zeus, she swears by the bed that she shares with her husband. So the nuptial bed is very important. It's more than the concrete object. Odysseus and Penelope certainly return to their former bed in the concrete sense of the wooden furniture that the king once built, but they will also renew their union on the sexual level, namely, what is sexuality in archaic poetry? It's what is Themis between men and women, and we have a verse of the Iliad in book 9 that explicitly tells this. It's sexuality is what is Themis between men and women. So after 20 years, Odysseus and Penelope also renew their union as an established institution, which is rooted in the thesmos of the bed. So, and I finish with this passage, I don't want to minimize the concrete content of the term, but at this moment of the story, we cannot evacuate a more symbolic implication and the potentialities of a still isolated term, which will reappear for us at Athens in the early 6th century BC. So I'm perfectly conscious that the passage that you have on the screen with thesmos makes of thesmos an hapax. It's a very isolated term, but you can feel how rich it is in this first occurrence of the word. And so, last part of my talk. Sorry, I'm a bit longer. I will try to hurry. The next appearance of thesmos is at Athens in the early 6th century BC with Solon's poetry. So Solon wrote, as you know, laws for the Athenians. Unfortunately, they are only preserved by later and often dubious tradition. He also wrote poetry. Some fragments more reliable than references to the laws have been transmitted by Demosthenes and the constitution of the Athenians from the Aristotelian school. In this text, and that's why they are so interesting for me, Solon uses the words thesmos and eunomia, on which I will focus so in this last part of my talk. And I'm sorry, I was very optimistic when I gave Hélène all these references to Aeschylus Eumenides, because I won't have time to address Aeschylus. It will be short with Solon. So first fragment, number 36 in Martin West edition, and I quote verses 15, 20, for which I give you a personal translation, more literal than others, not that beautiful than others, but it's easier for me to comment the text with my own literal translation. So I read the text, the translation. And this and it's Solon who is talking, this I've done by virtue of my power, holding together strength and justice, and you have decay. And I have kept my promises to the end. I have made laws equally, and you see laws, it's thesmos, so the thesmoi. I've made laws equally for the humble and for the noble, adjusting a right justice to each. And it's even more that I have made laws. I have written laws. Sorry, I should have changed this. It's egrapsa. I've written laws. So in this poetic text, we find decay written in thesmoi, applicable to all, with a resonance with decay and Themis behind the thesmos. Of course, you have a connection between thesmos and Themis. And another fragment confirms the resonance, what I call the resonance. This is the fourth fragment. It's not a fragment because it's probably a complete poem of 40 verses, opening, and you don't have the opening on the screen, on a reference to the protection of Zeus, the other gods, and especially, of course, we are in Athens, the protection of Athena, who, and I quote the poem, above the favored land lifts a guardian hand. And so you have the presence of the gods, the protecting gods at the very beginning of the poem. And further on, Solon, and you have the text on the screen, describes the ravages of the greed of the richest who hold power and the injustice of their acts of plunder. And I quote the translation. And so is describing the ravages of the powerful, richest man of the city. Sparing neither sacred nor public goods, they steal by plundering each one on its side, and do not take care of the venerable foundation of decay, whose silence knows well what happens and what happened, and using the time arrives absolutely to make pay the price. And the expression that interests me is, of course, semna dices temetla. As is often the case, and I referred to it before, the choice of capital or lowercase for the initial letters of names is a modern interpretation. And here I deliberately choose the capital letter for decay, even if it's not the case. It's in many editions of this poem, which is here, in my opinion, the divine power of the theogony. And why? Because the expression determined by decay is significant. The semna temetla, that is the venerable foundation, inevitably lead back to the semantic field of Themis. The decay of Solon is the daughter of Themis, the divinity of the requirement of balance, which integrates justice, even if a strictly genealogical expression is missing here, because it's often the argument, but no, it's impossible. It's not the God. You don't have genealogy. But do we need genealogy to recognize something of divine behind these words? I don't think so. And a last resonance can be mentioned. Other verses reported by the constitution of the Athenians express the ambitions of Solon in the following terms. And I read the translation. To the people, yes, I gave the share that was sufficient. Sorry. And you can see the word in Greek, it's geras, that we mentioned before, without subtracting anything or adding anything to their lot of honor. As for those who had the power enshrined by their wealth, I also took care that they did not suffer any indignity. Firm, I protected with a solid shield the two parties and did not let either of them but be unjustly victorious. So you recognize here the delicate balance in the recognition of honor through an appropriate geras, as well as the alliance of force and justice in the previous. You can see here you have bia and decay. The alliance of force and justice in the preceding passage, and it inevitably makes one think of the action of Zeus in the Theogony. You recognize exactly the same vocabulary in this passage. But the major difference is the fact that here Solon aims at maintaining possessions or restoring them, and not at granting an adequate time to those who have been deprived of it. Solon restores a previously existing equilibrium. It does not create a new balance. And so I think, and I hope to convince you, the evocation of Solon's action in the city of Athens recalls the stabilization of the divine society under the action of Zeus after the internal crisis like the titanomachi, a kind of stasis which says the divine word. Of course, I'm conscious that the model, if I'm right, is certainly ambitious, but the use of the marked vocabulary can be seen, I guess, as an intentional mirror effect. Does this imply that at some point in Greek history, laws were passed from heaven to earth, with humans becoming, as I said in my introduction, the measure of all things? As usual, things are more complicated, and the mirror effect in Solon's poetry is, I guess, more a sign of continuity than a rupture in the representation of the word and of justice itself. And I show you briefly, because time is going, another passage in the fragment 4, the poetry that I mentioned before, and you can see on the screen, but I won't comment it. I don't have time anymore. The notion of dysnomie, eunomie, eris, who are goddesses in the theogony. So in many editions, you find this word without capital letter. But I think that we have the process of grasping the heritage of the theogony. So it's really time to conclude. The uses of nomos, perhaps I will stop sharing this. Okay. So I briefly conclude. The uses of nomos in Hesiod attest that the word had been available, at least for a good century, when the Athenian laws were written. Moreover, Solon's prize of eunomia underscored the importance of the semantic field of just distribution and respectful use of measure in his political project. And you can see this, it's very, very clear in Solon's poetry. However, it's not the term nomos that is used to designate the laws he wrote, but rather the term thesmos. Obviously, the semantic field of like the bed, the meticulous arrangement and of the instituted foundation has prevailed over that of custom and tradition. Even if both of them, thesmos and nomos, are potentially associated with rules imposed by Zeus himself. But in no way can thesmos and nomos be considered as respectively designating divine laws versus human law. In no way can we elaborate a theory of evolution regarding this vocabulary. On the contrary, our lexical journey shows, I hope, that the two words designate the same reality from a different angle. The institution for thesmos, the distribution for nomos, both of them commanded by Themis and Dike. And when Xenophon writes the passage we read earlier, 2 centuries had passed since the time of Solon. The word thesmos has acquired the flavor of an ancient way of designating what the classical language calls nomos. But while this reflects an evolution in language, it does not necessarily reflect an evolution in the way the law is conceived. Thank you for your attention and sorry for being so long, but it's quite difficult for me to evaluate what time it will take me in English. So thank you for your patience.
Oh, thank you very much. This is a wonderful, very clear presentation. Let me change the view here to the gallery so that we can have the feel of conversation here.
Sorry, I realized that I took an hour. No. I'm sorry. It was not the rule at the very beginning.
Well, let's stay on a bit and have a couple of questions. In any case, there was one that was sent to me in the chat, which I will read out here. And this goes back to the genealogy with which you began, and then you commented on at the end as well. Is this particular genealogy, specifically Themis as the mother of the Horai and the Moirai, is this genealogy Hesiod's poetic creation, or is there evidence that it may predate the theogony? What do you think?
It's a very difficult question because, of course, we don't have any evidence before epic poetry and archaic poetry. So it's very difficult to know if it's a complete creation or not. But I would like to say it's not that important, because the fact that it would be a poetic creation, because I don't make a strict difference between poetry and religious representation. For me, it's the same world. And even if the poet has the opportunity to create something, is dealing with a previous material, and it makes sense, it has to make sense to his audience. So it means that Themis, Dike, Eunomia, and so on were related to each other even before, because it has, related, I don't know exactly how, but you can see in poetry, for the same figure, you have many different genealogies. It's not that important. The important is what the poet wants to tell about this figure by genealogy. Is it clear?
Mm-hmm. I think so. Are there alternative genealogies out there of these figures or related figures? Hesiod really is the main source, I think, for this kind of thing.
For example, in Altmann poetry, you have a Nomia who is, if I remember well, the daughter of Promethea and the sister of Peito and Tyche. So it means that Altmann will tell something quite different than Hesiod, but with the same material and with a core of meaning, which is remaining, still there.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see if there's another question. Georgia, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, because you said we don't have really an evolution of terminology, about the use of deke in Homer, because deke in Homer is used mainly as a custom. The verb forms adikeo have this meaning of justice, or what we sense is just within. But when he refers to deke Dmon, deke Breton, deke, so it's the custom of the slaves, the custom of the mortals, the custom of the kings, not necessarily the just procedures or the just actions. And even Zeus has a problematic, perhaps moral-free presentation in Homer. I recall the description of his jars, where he somehow
yes, of course,
mixture of evil and good. I'm wondering, how do you explain then this deke, the use of deke in Homer, where we have this first, let's say, appearance and familiarization with the term, and then the scenery, this amazing scenery of the throne of Zeus with Themis and Dike, left and right, which is another picture. So
yes, of course. Yes.
So
thank you. Yes, thank you so much for asking this, because of course I had to make choices in my presentation, and perhaps first to precise it, I don't pretend that there's no evolution in the use of the words. Of course, the language is always in evolution, and the use of nomos is quite clear in this respect. But what I meant is that we must be very cautious to interpret the evolution in the use of words as a complete change of mentality. That's what I refer to. Of course, DK in Homer and DK in Athens in the 5th century BC, it's not so rich. In Homer, it's richer than in Athens in the 5th century. You are completely right. But in Homer, what is really, you are right about the custom and so on. It's quite difficult to understand, because some people are trying to combine it to etymology, but I'm not sure at all. But if you accept, I would like to focus on the relationship between Themistes and Dikai, because we have this expression quite often. You have to base on Themistes to tell Dikai, and it's exactly what I see in the genealogical process in Hesiod. You have the basis of Themis, and the Themistes are sentences based on Themis, and the consequence is more concrete. It's a decision, and there are decisions and there are decay. And so you have also the connection between the background of Themis and the Themistus, and then the decision and the decay. So I see the same relationship between both of them. But I hope that I reply correctly. Clearly, not correctly, clearly.
Thank you, Georgia, for that question. Maria, I see that your hand is up, please.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation. I will continue in English.
Yes, of course.
Well, you gave us an excellent analysis of every kind of nuances of the word Themis in poetry. Just out of curiosity, would you like to comment on two particular terms that interest us when we move on to prose? And it's they are related to Themis. It is the ta thesmia and ta nomima, which both terms are used in Herodotus and in Thucydides. But in general, their use becomes more amplified as the the years go by. So would you like to comment on these two terms? Thank you very much.
Course. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. If I had a lot of time, I would have also show you the epigraphic material, because it's very interesting, and it will give me the opportunity to address your question. If you look at the epigraphic material, you have the opportunity to see the connection between thesmos and nomos, nomia, nomaya, nomima, and so on and so forth. And we can exactly see that what is related to thesmos is related to the institution, the moment of institution. Tode or thesmos, and then you have the decision and the reference to the background of what has already been instituted is nomima, nomaya, and so on. So with nomos, nomima, and nomaya, you have time, which must be convened in the reflection. So thesmos, it's the moment of institution, and then nomos, it becomes the habit and the custom of the community. So nomaya, nomima, it's all the ways of being and ways of doing, as I referred to before. And we can see in the passage of the Theogony that I show you about the song of the Muses, they sing, if I remember well, the nomoi and the etiakedna of the immortal God. So it's all these ways of being and doing, but inspired in some way by Themis and by the requirement of balance and all these elements which are infusing the custom of a community.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous.
Jack, yeah, go ahead. This maybe should be our last question.
Well, I would say the same thing Maria said, and her bringing in the prose and you're bringing in the epigraphy. makes me think about Solmsen's 1949 book that Aeschylus, Hesiod and Aeschylus, which, you know, it's like an extended essay that doesn't go into the detail that you do, but shows the sweep of the development of the ideas from Hesiod through Solon to Aeschylus's Eumenides, of these ideas of law, and then the opposite. Well, he talks about divine law and human law, and how there are distinctions between decay and hubris on the human side, he as he looks at it, and the Themis and other concepts, you know, on the divine side. Then he brings it forward with just sort of like a throwaway note at the end, with Plato's Republic, you know, with the idea of the city and the individual being parallel in Plato, and Solmsen's view is that you know, there's not parallel in the archaic poetry and Aeschylus. Anyway, his focus is more on, I'm impressed by the influence of Hesiod on Aeschylus, and Solon's poetry is very, very interesting in this connection. But it seems to me that there's so much to be said, you know, about these concepts, you know, down to Aristophanes' thesmophoria.
Yes, of course. You are perfectly right. I would like in the next years in my courses at the college to take the dossier of Demeter Thesmophoros. I think we have a lot of work to do on this, because what are these thesmoi? So no, I completely agree. But as I said, it's a small part of a huge dossier and a huge problem.
All right. Well, thank you again for also staying a little bit longer for these questions. Thank you to those of you who are in this meeting for joining us, and thank you to those of you who are out there watching. Please join us again